Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another of our Friday night spooky sessions. I have two stories for you tonight, one based on fact and some urban legend, and the other one a fictional story. I'll start as always with your fictional story, and tonight's story is called Avalina's Doll. Sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy it. Just last week, my mum's favourite Vietnam doll from the 1970s broke by falling off a shelf with a loud commotion. It was made out of a type of glass that a vase would be made out of. She seemed somewhat negatively affected by it. I told her that I'd see what I could do to get it replaced. She told me that the only reason why it meant so much to her is that because she'd had it ever since she was 7. She's never owned anything for that long before. Well, after I heard about the accident, she told me that a garage sale was just up the street from her place. So I took a stroll there and checked out what they had. The garage sale was run by an old man and his wife, and most of what they were selling were movies from the 1960s, children's books, and I thought, oh, they must be grandparents. Nothing much came to interest except for this doll at the sale. It looked oddly like my mum's Vietnam doll. It was a bit bizarre, really. It had the long dark hair, the beautiful dark red dress, the little black slips, and even the pale white on its skin. But something was a bit strange about the doll. The eyes were pitch black instead of baby blue. I thought nothing of it and approached the old man and asked him how much the doll was. He just laughed a little and said, "I remember that doll. It's a china doll. It used to belong to my granddaughter. Too bad she passed." Well, I asked him what he meant, and he told me, "My granddaughter was 16 when she died. She committed suicide. God only knows why she did it." I thought a little deep into it, and then again asked how much the doll was without even realising that I hadn't got an answer to my question in the first place. And he told me that he wasn't even going to charge me for it. He just wanted it out of his sight. I replied with a soft, "Thank you." I kept thinking about how oddly strange and suspicious the old man was. Well, when I arrived home, I showed my mum the doll. "It's perfect," she said with a huge grin on her face. Well, ever since then, she hasn't said anything negative about the doll. All she said was that it oddly looked exactly like the one that she had. And I noticed that she's become very, very attached to it. Whenever I go over to her house, I see her in her rocking chair, rocking back and forth, staring into the doll's darkened eyes. It's a little creepy, to be honest. So after that, I took a break from going over to her house because I had this nightmare the other day after seeing how attached she's been to the doll. The nightmare started out where I was in a well-lit room. I knew I was dreaming, but in the dream, I was trying to uncover something. Across from where I was standing, there was a little girl. She looked quite similar to the doll itself. I asked her what she wanted. She told me that she was there to warn me about the horrors that the doll holds in its place. Well, I asked her what she meant. She told me that the doll was in the possession of my mother and it was possessed by an evil spirit. Well, it explains a little as to why my mum has been acting so bizarrely and quite unusually lately. In my dream, I asked if I could destroy the doll. The little girl said no, as it could be released and the evil spirit would be easier to contact inside my mum's body. It could cause my mum to get possessed. The little girl told me that I should try to get rid of the doll somehow, other than trying to destroy it. Unfortunately, I didn't know much at that time. It was only a nightmare, and God knows if what the little girl in my dream spoke of was even a real thing. The day after I had that nightmare, bizarre things started to happen. My mum was acting a bit strange, and she no longer answered me on the phone. She didn't even call me. Something was wrong and I had to get to the bottom of it. I went over to my mum's house, and when I approached the door, it was already open. What horrors could be in there? I dashed inside and into my mum's room. She was sitting in a corner, shivering. She turned around and she grinned. Something was definitely off with her. Her eyes were darkened. I stumbled back in terror. "What's wrong?" And she said, "You don't like how I look?" And her voice was demonic. I then noticed the brutal cuts up and down her arms. What the hell's going on? I need to see a priest before this goes too far, I thought to myself. The next time, I'd spoken to a priest about what was going on with my mother. The only problem was that I had to wait 5 days until I could get him to get here. Well, he recently arrived at the house, and I held the door open so that I could walk ahead of him when he came into the house. Stumbled up the stairs with the man and explained what's been going on with my mum and the doll. He simply replied, "Was it Avalina's doll?" I didn't even know what he spoke of, so I questioned him about the name, Avalina. Well, he told me she was about 10 years old and she lived with her grandparents. She one day was roaming the attic looking for a spare light bulb, and instead she found the china doll. The doll my mum owned as her own. Avalina decided to call the doll Emily. And a little after that, after she'd found the doll, Avalina noticed something wrong. There was something wrong with the doll itself. She warned her grandparents about the horrors the doll had, and because it showed her things that she didn't want to witness. But as a punishment, they trapped her in the cellar of their house until she quit her nonsense about the china doll. But she continued to talk about it. And then it came to one day that they, believe it or not, they tied her to a chair in the cellar and set her on fire. A burnt corpse faded into the grass as they sprinkled her ashes in the yard of their home. I knew there was something off about that old couple, and I finally found out what. After our discussion, we approached my mother's room. We walked inside, and my mum was curled up in a ball on top of the bed. This black stuff was oozing out of her back, where there appeared to be a deep cut. Well, the priest told me to wait outside the room, and I did so. All I heard the whole time waiting was chanting and screaming. I just waited patiently, trying not to ask what the wait was. About half an hour later, he brought me into the room and explained the entity that possessed my mother was the exact same one that had manipulated Avalina. The priest told me that in order to fix everything back to the way it was, the China doll had to be buried. I took the doll to an abandoned ranch, not that far away from where my mum's house was. I buried the doll, and ever since, everything's been fine. For about a week, my mum spoke about that China doll, Emily. The most bizarre thing is that a day after the entity left my mum's spirit, the old couple's house from where my mum lives, up the road from them, the house burned down with them inside it. They were sound asleep in their bed. Some even said that they spotted a little girl in the area with dark hair and a red dress. She looked a lot similar to how the doll looked itself. To this day, I wonder if the soul was laying to rest, or if a doorway opened up from another dimension. A dimension that can't be closed. So, what do you think? Was it a portal to another dimension? Had something been opened where the proper goodbyes hadn't been meant or said properly? You know, when you have a Ouija session and you have to close it down by saying goodbye in order to close the portal between the living and the dead. Was that portal left open so that evil spirits could roam freely? Something we could talk about in the comments. Let me know what you think. Well, for your true story tonight, I'm going to tell you about a story that was reported in New York in 2006. It's from an anonymous witness, someone who obviously doesn't want her name made public because she, her son is still relatively young, so she wants to protect him. So we have to honour that. But some say it's urban legend, others say it's definitely true because they've been through something very similar themselves. So you've got one side opposing the other. One side saying it's a myth, a story blown out of all proportion. Others say, no, this is real, this is true. They stand by what they believe in. So I'll read you the story, and then at the end, you decide. This story is called The Rake. And as I said, this is from a witness in 2006 from New York. 3 years ago, I had just returned from a trip from Niagara Falls with my family for the 4th of July. We were all very exhausted after a long day of driving, so my husband and I put the kids right to bed and called it a night. At about 4 a.m, I woke up thinking my husband had forgotten to use the bathroom. I used the moment to steal back the sheets, only to wake him in the process. I apologised and I told him I thought he'd got out of bed. And when he turned to face me, he gasped and pulled his feet up from the end of the bed so quickly, his knee almost knocked me out of the bed. He then grabbed me and said nothing. After adjusting to the dark for half a second, I was able to see what caused the strange reaction. At the foot of the bed, sitting and facing away from us, there was what appeared to be a naked man, or a large hairless dog of some sort. Its body position was disturbing and unnatural, as if it had been hit by a car or something. For some reason, I was not instantly frightened by it, but more concerned as to its condition. And at this point, I was somewhat under the assumption that we were supposed to help him. My husband was peering over his arm and knee, tucked into the fetal position, occasionally glancing at me before returning to the creature. In a flurry of motion, the creature scrambled around the side of the bed and then quickly crawled to a flailing sort of motion right along the side of the bed until it was less than a foot from my husband's face. The creature was completely silent for about 30 seconds, probably closer to 5. It just seemed like a while. Just looking at my husband. The creature then placed its hand on his knee and ran into the hallway leading to the kids' rooms. I screamed and ran for the light switch, planning to stop him before he hurt my children. And when I got to the hallway, the light from the bedroom was enough to see it crouching and hunched over about 20 feet away. He turned around and looked directly at me, covered in blood. I flipped the switch on the wall and I saw my daughter, Clara. The creature ran down the stairs while my husband and I rushed to help our daughter. She was very badly injured and spoke only once more in her short life. She said, "He is the Rake." My husband drove his car into a lake that night while rushing our daughter to the hospital. They didn't survive. Being a small town, news got around pretty quickly. The police were helpful at first, and the local newspaper took a lot of interest as well. However, the story was never published and the local television news never followed up on it either. For several months, my son and I stayed in a hotel near my parents' home. After we decided to return to our own house, I began looking for answers myself. I eventually located a man in the next town over who had a similar story. We got in contact and began talking about our experiences. He knew of 2 other people in New York who had seen the creature that we now referred to as the Rake. It took the 4 of us about 2 solid years of hunting on the internet and writing letters to come up with a small collection of what we believe to be accounts of the Rake. None of them gave any details, history or follow-up. One journal had an entry involving the creature in its first 3 pages and never mentioned it again. A ship's log explained nothing of the encounter, saying only that they were told to leave by the Rake. That was the last entry in the log. There were, however, many instances where the creature's visit was one of a series of visits with the same person. Multiple people also mentioned being spoken to, my daughter included. This led us to wonder if the Rake had visited us before our last encounter. I set up a digital recorder near my bed and left it running all night, every night, for 2 weeks. I would tediously scan through the sounds of me rolling around in my bed each day when I woke up. And by the end of the 2nd week, I was quite used to the occasional sound of sleep while blurring through the recording at 8 times the normal speed. This still took almost an hour every day. On the first day of the 3rd week, I thought I heard something different. What I found was a shrill voice. It was the rake. I can't listen to it long enough to begin to transcribe it. I haven't let anyone else listen to it yet. All I know is I've heard it before, and I now believe that it spoke when it was sitting in front of my husband. I don't remember hearing anything at the time, but for some reason, the voice in the recorder immediately brings me back to that moment. The thoughts that must have gone through my daughter's head make me very upset. I haven't seen the rake since he ruined my life, but I know that he's been in my room while I slept. I know and fear that one night I'll wake up to see him staring at me. There, ladies and gentlemen, and that concludes the story of the rake. Now, I've heard some stories about the rake before, and I've seen what people claim to be sort of video captures of, a strange, pale, hairless looking creature, with shining eyes, staring out at the darkness. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know enough about it to really understand what it is, who it is, or why it is. I don't know where it comes from, where it goes to. Absolutely nothing. I'm really interested to find out if any of you have heard stories about the rake before. Have any of you had any encounters? Or saying that, have any of you had an encounter with a creature that you just can't explain? It's strange when you think about things that happen, like when you look at the corner of your eye and you just catch something very quickly, and then you go to look again and it's not there. How many of us have been sitting and on the outskirts of our peripheral vision, we've seen something standing there, or sitting there, or even crouching on the floor, and we've blinked and almost missed it, but we know we've seen something. We just don't know what it is. Now, a lot of the time, if it's late at night, you can blame tiredness. You think, well, I've been rubbing my eyes, it's natural, giving my eyes time to settle, that I'm bound to see something that really isn't there. If you've had any alcohol late at night, that can play tricks on you. The light can play tricks on you, whether it's natural light or electric light. If you've got candles there, they can be notorious in making you think there's something there when there isn't. But how do you account for stories of things that you see in broad daylight? How do you account for them? Things that people have seen in the middle of the day while they're wide awake. How do you account for them? What if these people are what you'd consider perfectly normal, well-adjusted, ordinary thinking people, not doing anything of great importance at the time? They're just getting on with their day, and then they have to see something, a shadow person. They see something to the side of them. They feel something watching them. They get that feeling in the solar plexus that something isn't quite right. And you just can't put the finger on it. How do you explain that? Because it's important to look for all the rational reasons first. And once you've answered all those questions and narrowed everything down, then what are you left with? The impossible, the unnatural, the unexplainable. The good thing about our Friday night spooky sessions is the fact none of us would be here if we didn't have some level of belief. Maybe some of us are here because they just like to get a tingle down their spines. And that's fine too. But there will be others here who have a natural inclination towards all things supernatural. You know, reaching out for something that normally you wouldn't be able to see or touch or feel or even smell. And then suddenly all these become very real to you. And it's a very real experience. Not everything can be boiled down to hallucination or tiredness or alcohol or whatever. Some things are very, very real. And we all have a voice, and we should all be allowed to voice our fears and our concerns and be listened to and taken seriously. Because there's so much that we don't understand, and there's so much we've yet to explore. We don't have all the answers. And science doesn't always give us the answers to the questions that we have. And I think as time goes on, we're becoming more open-minded and more accepting of those things that we were once frightened to talk about. At one time, nobody would have dared talking about seeing a ghost or anything like that because people would actually think you were crazy. Now, when you talk about them, you're not really treated that way, not as much as it used to be. People are a lot more accepting, and they're a lot more willing to listen and to share their own experiences. And that's one of the good things about the Haven, because we all accept each other, no matter what experiences we've shared, no matter what we've gone through, because we know that we're going to be listened to. And nobody's going to laugh at you. Nobody's going to judge you. As you've seen over the last weeks, when people have shared their own scary stories, none of us have laughed at them. We've just accepted it. Because for us, it's real. So we do have a lot to talk about. I do hope you enjoyed your stories tonight. I've enjoyed reading them. I hope you like what I chose for you. But as always, please tell me in the comments. And if there's anything in particular that you would like me to cover, or you'd like me to read for you, or research for you, all you have to do is tell me, and I'll do my best. So as always, thank you again for watching. Thank you again for listening. And thank you again for being here. And I will see you on Monday. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Good night.